Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Revolution. And welcome back to our program. Very happy to see everybody on Facebook and on YouTube. And we're back on X. We're back on X. You know, we had to pay money to get back on X to that so and so Elon Musk, who is presently in Pittsburgh trying to win the election for Trump, spending all of his money and all of his time there. Just read a big article about that in the New York Times. So I hope that the good people of Pennsylvania are going to send Elon Musk back to where he came from, even though the South Africans said to me, Joe, we don't want him. Send him maybe send him to Mars on that SpaceX. Send that son of I don't even want to say, what is he, the son of a rock back to
or the X or whatever. Just say like we're back on.
Yes, I can hear you, Sharon. Anyway, good morning, everybody. Rosanna and Molly and Scott. We got a lot to talk about this morning. We're continuing our dive into some of the ideas behind problems in the left and the Marxist movement and the communist and socialist movement that we started a couple of weeks ago when we were discussing how would Lenin vote in the November election, because we base many of our ideas on the thinking of Marx, Engels, Lenin, and the creators of working class revolutionary thought since. And so let's get started, Scott. We last 2 weeks ago were talking about left-wing communism, and you know, in that book, in that pamphlet, Lenin talks about what he calls opportunism on the right and on the left. And in particular, he's dealing with the problems that developed in the international socialist movement prior to and during World War I. And the major problem, he said, was right opportunism. Even though that book was devoted to, after the Russian Revolution, its left wing extremist position. Everybody was, heady, happy, joyous, exuberant after the Russian Revolution, and they thought that they could make it everywhere and were making a whole lot of immature mistakes. But Scott, is 100 years later. A lot has changed. What do you think is the major problem in the movement, in the socialist movement today, in the left today? Is it opportunism on the right, or is it still opportunism on the left, in your opinion?
I guess I sort of think of this question more in terms of like the danger less within the left, within the socialist movement, than in terms of like the danger to the working class. And to my mind, it's clearly right opportunism at this moment. So we're in a time when the crises of capitalism are deepening. There's the objective conditions for a huge surge in class consciousness. And in fact, we see that happening, around the increased militancy of labor, the increasing, political role of the working class. But the right wing is really trying as hard as it can to split that up and divide it and demobilize it, including by, trying to turn one section of the working class against immigrants, for example, blaming immigrants for all the problems that capitalism has caused for the working class. Or, for example, saying that LGBTQ plus struggles and other democratic struggles are the work of woke elites and contrary to working class interests. That's trying to pull a section of the working class to the right and split it, and that pressure can lead to right opportunism. So I think that's a huge threat. Although there are obviously threats of left opportunism too.
And when we talk about right opportunism, we're talking about making concessions, giving in to pressures. giving up on class struggle, getting bought off, and so on and so forth. But Rosanna, some would argue, and in fact, we hear this a lot in our party. Well, maybe not a lot, but we do hear it, that the major problem is left opportunism, left sectarianism, people dismissing the electoral struggle, saying that the other two parties are just the same, celebrating armed struggle, pursuing narrow politics. Some even, applauding, terroristic tactics. So, in your opinion, what's the party's experience? Is the biggest problem on the right, or is it on the left? Is it a little bit of both? What do you think?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. Um, I think it comes from, sort of being lost and confused. In some instances, it's because what you read in books isn't what's happening in your life, or, something as similar to what's happening, what you read. And so you get kind of disoriented. And I think that what's key is to be able to really look at things very objectively, in the here and now, using the some of the stuff that we read, but the skill is in how to apply it to the here and now. And a lot of and key to that, I think, is to be able to look at the situation, be in the trenches, be on the ground with people, listen. And I think Lenin also says you have to be connected to the masses. You have to be connected to people. You have to have that experience. In some cases, that's what's lacking, is that on the ground experience of struggle, being out there, even canvassing. If comrades would just give that a chance and go, or people, not just comrades, but people on the left would just go and do some canvassing, and be out there, campaigning, you would see the value of it. You see the value, and not just the value, but the power of being out there talking to the working class and really getting a feel for what they're thinking. Once you do that, then you have a better opportunity to make a good analysis that leads you to a winning tactic. I hope that
So
answers your question.
it does quite well, and Molly, what Rosanna is saying makes me think that the problem, and we see a lot of it amongst some of our newer members, that there is a problem of leftism. You get people coming into the party and they say dual power now. We have to establish workers' councils, or let us start doing military training, or um, you know, I really don't see a difference between a Trump and a Kamala Harris. They're all, and there are some similarities in foreign policy, we must say, you know, we don't want to ignore those. But Molly, is the problem um, uh, youth just, being introduced to the revolutionary movement, or is it learning about it online? Some people call it, internet Marxism, studying by yourself and not in a collective. Or is it the problem lack of experience and connection with mass movements, and not, as Rosanna was talking about, and not being on the ground and involved in struggle with other people? What's your experience in Cleveland?
Well, I mean, I think the problem is the capitalist class. Ultimately, there are issues with the Democratic Party, where they don't care about people, they don't respond to their constituents, and there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of trauma, and that doesn't just go away. That gets passed down and passed around. And then on the right, there's a lot of propaganda from the right wing, that opposes the Democratic coalition and you'll be talking to somebody on the left, and all of a sudden they will say something from the right wing, and you'll just be like, where did you hear that? So I think when it comes to our media being dominated by the capitalist class, and I think when it comes to the real pitfalls and the real failures of the Democratic Party, you end up with a population of people who are disengaged and are aggressive and oppositional to any power structure in our society. It becomes I'm just going to do it on my own, or I'm just going to organize the unorganized, and not realizing that we need alliances to win.
This is a big problem, Scott. I mean, Molly points to something that's very real. There is a mass radicalization process that is taking place. People are furious at both parties, and people who would naturally be constituents of the Democratic Party are furious at the Democratic Party for NAFTA, for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, for the war on Gaza, you name it. They're angry. But, Cameron was telling me yesterday about people who he knows who are furious still at the Democratic Party because of the way that they treated Bernie Sanders. A lot of them joined our party. I don't blame them for being mad. But there is a fascist danger. And we are in a people's front, a popular front period to combat that danger. And we have found that during popular front periods in our own history, that the danger of right opportunism grows. Isn't that true? I mean, we saw that during the popular front against fascism, during the Roosevelt years. That was when Browder and that policy of class collaboration and giving up on the party happened. And we saw what happened in our own party, didn't we? During the 90s, during not the 90s, but during the 8 years Obama was the president from 2008 to 2016, there were right-wing pressures on our party from Webb and others, and gave up the YCL. Pressure was put on us to give up PA. Pressure was put on us to give up our name, so on and so forth. And so, Scott, is how do we is the problem of putting the emphasis on the greater danger, does that inevitably lead to concessions because you're reluctant to criticize people and organizations and politicians who are in the coalition for fear of creating openings for the fascist right? Is that an inevitable problem? And if so, how do you address it?
I don't think any problem is inevitable, but there does seem to be a pattern. And sometimes, though, that right opportunist drift or whatever expresses itself in those tactical terms that you mentioned, like we can't criticize so and so because that would split the coalition. But I think really underneath it, there's an ideological problem that has to do with our understanding of class struggle and its role in the broader process of social change. So if you look at the two examples you mentioned, the Browder period and the period under Obama, if we look at the similarities and differences, we can sort of see that emerging, right? So in the Browder period, the working class was kind of at or approaching a high point in terms of militancy, political and labor organization. The party was, was a mass party. Um, and the alliance between the United States and the UK and the Soviet Union in World War II sort of tempted Browder away from class struggle. Like he got this idea that the alliance, particularly between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, showed that there was a progressive element in the capitalist class that could, help lead the struggle forward. Right. So he lost sight of class struggle, lost sight for the need for a working class revolutionary party, and then things were kind of different from the opposite end of things in the Obama period, because the working class was at a much lower ebb in terms of organization, power. Unions had been decimated, the industrial workforce had been decimated, and we were still figuring out how to rebuild. And in those conditions, it also became very easy to lose sight of the central role of class struggle and of the working class in the process of change, right? Because you had the great, and it was a huge victory, the election of Obama, the huge electoral mobilization of African Americans, of youth. Just it was a big deal, right? But it became easy to again lose sight of the class struggle. So that's where the danger is when we, in one way or another, lose sight of the central role of the class struggle. It's not inevitable, but it's easier to do in these popular front periods when the working class can't just, as you sometimes say, go it alone.
But Rosanna, isn't it the case that we fight to put what Scott likes to call, borrowing from Lenin, a working class imprint, a working class stamp within this broad popular front to push forward working class interests, Lenin argues it's not a problem to form coalitions with temporary coalitions with the sections of the capitalist class. That's not the issue, so long as you fight for working class positions, fight for working class issues. But in this election, it's not clear to me that the working class has, in the trade union movement, even though they're very involved in the fight against Trump, have been able to put their stamp on the presidential campaign with respect to the issues. And some people are arguing that the Harris campaign is now tacking to the right, on immigration, on the issue of the war, and so on and so forth. So how do we, what can we do to continue to put forward and fight for working class positions throughout the remaining part of the election campaign, but also afterwards, in your opinion? Can't hear you.
Sorry. I think that we have to continue our fight to put, to help the working class understand their power in every way that we can. That's vital to being able to fully win, uh, you know, uh, uh, the path and really fully open the path towards socialism, is having workers understand their power. And so um, they may not get it at this moment in time, the full impact. But also Lenin talks about the need for experience, the needs that the learning from your mistakes, uh, moving forward, and how do we make an analysis of the here and now, kinds of things. So I think we continue to not waver in our goal of putting, helping the working class uh, put their, winning demands forward, but also understanding that there are all kinds of other forces that are working against us. But that doesn't mean that we lose sight of it. What it means is that we just have to continue, and sometimes it's through experience that helps the working class understand what direction they need to go to. And I cite what's happening in Mexico. There's a lot we can learn from what's happening throughout Latin America. But in Mexico, there was, continually voter fraud, voter fraud, and each time their candidate would lose, not because of the popular vote, but because of the voter fraud. People they began to understand that they had to go out in mass and be able to vote, a massive voter turnout, so that it could not, even if they attempted voter fraud, they could not, the right could not deny it because there was just too great of a number. And that's happened in several other countries. So it's understand the people understood that that's what they needed to do. They didn't understand it, and for example, in Mexico, the first two rounds of the previous president of Mexico, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, but they understood it on the third try, and so that they were able to really fully elect a progressive president that the right could not interfere in. And I think that that's what we need to do here as well, is create this massive voter turnout so that the right could not infiltrate. They cannot stop it at any point, because there's already talk about how they could legislatively stop the vote and have the Supreme Court decide all of these kinds of things, that attempts that they're already putting in place to counter that. So we need to ensure that massive voter turnout.
Good point, Molly. We're under a lot of pressure, you know, and sometimes pressures are very subtle; they're not direct, And we've seen that over the course of the years, that during periods of economic upsurge, when the economic cycle is in boom and unemployment is low and inflation is relatively, prices are always going up, but they're not going up as fast. And, strike struggles are not as pronounced. That it's sometimes difficult for us to keep the momentum going, and people get frustrated, and um, what do you as a club leader do in order to, during those periods, keep the revolutionary spirit going, and keep people engaged, and um, to increase and amplify the ideological work and spiritual work and cultural work that the party needs to do in order to keep things moving.
Yeah, I think you definitely just hit on it there. I want to kind of blend this answer with the last question as well. One of the things I think we need to be clear about now with our coalition partners is that there is a left center unity. Their trade unions are involved in this process. But at the end of the day, the Democratic Party is funded by and owned by the capitalist class, and they have the final say. So I think sometimes it can become, if we don't have a clarity around that, there can be kind of this illusion that this is a real equal coalition. Um, when in reality, when it comes to the Democratic Party, the power is imbalanced, and we're really doing this work so that we can oppose the right wing. And in some cities, they've successfully removed the right wing from office. But it's generally speaking, we have a long way to go before the right wing has lost its power. And when they are more weak, I think there needs to be some clarity now that among the working class, that our focus then will become, we talk about in our program on the monopoly capitalists, on the capitalists in the Democratic Party or the Democratic coalition, and that we need to be able to be independent and battle tested enough to split at that point. Um, in terms of keeping people engaged, I think one of the things that we have to be clear about is that there are, again, many failures and flaws in the Democratic coalition, policing, prisons. There's a saying, progressive except for Palestine, progressive except for, there's many poverty issues as well, that, housing, that Democrats are not strong on. And if we are turning our backs on those issues in this time, we're really perpetuating capital ideologies. It's probably rooted in the pollution, as Gus Hall called it, of racism, misogyny. So we need to make sure that as an organization and as a coalition movements, that we're addressing the issues that affect as the broadest possible of every element of our class, and never turning our back, on the threat of, being influenced by these ruling class ideas.
So, Scott, given these challenges that Molly was just enumerating, ideological work is really important. You know, we have to be politically, ideologically steeled. And it has to be the right kind of ideological work, doesn't it? Because not all left ideas in this mass radicalization process are right. Not all left ideas are right. That is to say, politically correct, Marxist in the strict definition of the word. And left ideas that seem right but aren't can have a big impact. Now I'm gonna get myself in a little bit of trouble. You take the concept of abolition that became popular during the anti-racist, anti-police murder upsurge after Breonna Taylor and George Floyd were murdered by the cops. Um, uh, Prison abolition, abolition of the police, and so on. Don't both concepts, aren't both of them underpinned by a certain concept of the state and the role of the state? And is it a Marxist concept or an anarchist one, in your
I
view?
mean, they're, those are anarchist those are slogans that come from anarchism, from the idea that the state itself, the existence of the state, of state power, is a problem. That state power has to be gotten rid of. We should say, before continuing, that abolition of the police, abolition of prisons, means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and that word abolition, the reason people choose it and coalesce around it is because of the incredibly important revolutionary role of the struggle for the abolition of slavery. That word is powerful, right? But these, we can't just get rid of prisons and police. We can't get rid of state power. It has to be taken, seized by the working class and used to combat to break down the capitalist power, the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, and replace it with something else. That said, we don't just use it as it exists, right? We struggle on all these issues that Molly mentioned before, for community control of the police, against the legalized slavery that exists in the prison system, for bail reform, for all sorts of issues that change how state power works, and makes it more in line with working class needs and ideals and less with capitalist ones. So that's an important part of this too. We used state power after the Civil War to implement radical reconstruction, and we're going to need it to break down dismantle the fascist threat in this country currently as well.
And we saw what happened, during the Reconstruction period when that state power exercised by the North in coalition with the ex-slaves and some of the poor whites during Reconstruction, when that support was removed, what happened? The former
Reaction.
slave owners came back to power. But Rosanna, we agree with our abolitionist siblings and comrades on the ultimate goal. We want to abolish the state too. I mean, we do. We have a difference in timing, tactical. They want to do it now, and we say we need to use that state, invest it with working class power so that we can make sure that that goal is met and the former slave owners don't come back into power. So we work together on those issues. We don't condemn, we don't dismiss, we don't call people names. But you got to admit that the defund, abolish the prison slogans kind of serve to narrow the movement and enabled the right wing to frame it in a certain way. Isn't that true?
I think, yeah, I agree with Scott when he says that it means different things to different people. It's not a complete analysis of what really needs to be done. How do you get to where you really want to go? How do you eliminate prisons, and how do you eliminate people getting killed by the police? How do you have some form of order, but not, you know, not like dictatorship type of order or anything like that. I think what's lacking is that the understanding that all of this has a process, and so to throw out slogans like that really only talk to those that are completely frustrated, but not to the full working class. The working class is not going to agree with abolishing the prisons. They're just not, because many of them feel that that's the right path, is through, to avoid crime and things like that, which is a whole subject in itself. But how do you help the working class overall, the masses of working class? Because that's what's ultimately going to bring this fundamental change that we're looking at. How do you educate? How do you help them to understand that there are better and more sober solutions to the things that worry us or the things that are affecting us? So all these kinds of things. And I think that those kinds of slogans are lacking that type of understanding, that it's a process. It's not going to happen overnight. And it takes time. There's no elevator to these things. You have to go step by step.
No elevator, you got to go step by step. And we do have to thank our abolitionist comrades for opening a door to a discussion and making very meaningful contributions to reframing the conversation, about finding non-police solutions to problems like mental health. You have a person who has mental health challenges, and they're doing disturbing things, and the first thing you do is call the police instead of calling a hospital in order there are non-police ways of addressing civil problems in the home, in the neighborhood. You don't necessarily have to call the cops. There are alternatives to prisons, to certain types of offenders and so on and so forth that have to be examined. And so those conversations are important and constructive, and we have to continue them. Molly, on the opposite side, the opposite extreme of anarchism, which calls uh, uh, for an immediate speed race to the final goal, communism, um, is the idea that goal itself is an illusion. There was a Marxist theoretician, I believe in Germany. I believe his name was Eduard Bernstein. And Bernstein argued that the movement is everything, the final goal is nothing. Movement is everything, the final goal is nothing. We don't need to talk about socialism, because we got enough problems in the here and now. And the thing is to get people engaged in the here and now. Do you think that sometimes that we ourselves lose sight of advocating for socialism as much as we need to? Is there like sometimes a creeping pressure on us because of the immensity of the problems that we have, or because of a lack of theoretical, whatever it might be, that we don't emphasize the fight for socialism enough?
Well, first I want to apologize. There might be some construction noises coming in. The Biden infrastructure bill has resulted in repaving my streets in my neighborhood. But I will say to this that, um, you know, people don't like just saying, just opposing things. People want a vision. That you had mentioned some of the benefits and the positives we can talk about from the abolition movement. Um, there's alternatives that we can incorporate now, and there's an understanding that having this idea of what it could be um, helps explain why we're taking certain positions now, right? And so it is really helpful to have a communist party, to have socialists and communists who are clear about what socialism, communism is, and also can be in the thick of it now to fight for reforms. Because when you're in those struggles and people get disillusioned, you're able to step back and see the big picture and remember why we're fighting, why we're in this, getting our hands dirty, as they say. So do we not talk about it enough? I don't think so. I think our existence as a communist party, I think it is in some ways enough. I mean, it's amazing that we are as strong as we are, and I think, yeah, we can talk about more ways to bring it in, but I at this moment, we need to be dead focused on fighting fascism.
Good point. Can't argue with that. Scott, another feature of this movement is everything idea is that socialism will evolve out of the ordinary course of struggle, evolutionary socialism. Bernstein again. Um, and here again, if you lose sight of the final goal, and if everything evolves, there's no need for a leap. There's no need for revolution. Now, we say we want a peaceful path to socialism, right? Via electoral means. Rosanna just spoke about a wonderful article she wrote yesterday in the People's World about what's taking place in Mexico. Pay attention, y'all. Pay attention. What's happening a little bit to the south. Um, does that mean that there's no longer a need for leaps for revolution? Or what then does a revolution look like in conditions of the fight for a peaceful transition?
So I think since we've undertaken the relentless criticism of everything that exists, including the CPUSA, I don't think we talk enough about revolution. Not in the grand, heroic, romantic, whatever way, but in a very concrete, practical way. There's been this huge mystification of the concept of revolution, as if most change is actually just gradual, and revolution is this dangerous, exceptional, whatever thing, like forcing it along or whatever. In fact, if we look at the world, the universe, revolution is part of all processes of change. That leap you're talking about, right? Things change slowly for a while. There are periods of equilibrium and then sudden large changes. We see that, in the life cycle of butterflies, in the life cycle of stars, in phase changes in materials and embryonic development, and we see it in history and society. So we need to be talking about revolution. Revolution is what gives us kind of our optimism, our hope, our discipline, right, to stay in the struggle, because we know that that large scale change is possible, right? It's not some fantasy, and when we lose the concept of revolution, our vision of what kind of change is possible narrows. So, and we should say on this point as well that revolution doesn't mean violent revolution necessarily. How the revolution will look depends on the strength of the working class and its allies. Can we prevent the ruling class from imposing violence on the revolutionary process, as Henry Winston said? Right. But this concept of revolution, I think, is an incredibly important one at a time when so many people in this country are disillusioned about the possibility of significant change, kind of in a position of throwing up their hands, saying, "What are you going to do?" Like, no, things can change. Revolution leaps are part of all processes of change, and here's our understanding of how we get there based on our science and our experience.
Well, thank you. Today we have touched on some of the problems, and we've only touched on them, that have inhabited our movement since its inception, and we're going to dig into more of them in subsequent editions of Good Morning Revolution. 2 weeks ago, when we talked about Lenin and how he would vote, and today we're opening windows into deeper discussions. And I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you think it's useful, and I hope you come back for future conversations. Before we go, we have a mailbag question, I think, that deals with another aspect of the ultimate goal, and that is socialism as it is practiced in other countries in the world. And so somebody wrote in and said, since you all are always saying that modern examples of communism, such as China or Venezuela, aren't real communism, please tell me exactly, specifically, what in the hell, they didn't say in the hell, that's me, do you believe communism to be? Anybody want to take a shot at that?
I can try.
Go ahead, Rosanna.
Yeah, I think, once again, it's about understanding the process that, you first you socialism is a step before communism. Socialism is the precursor, that it begins to set up the system of communism. So where communism when I first read this question, I thought about Star Trek, and how they live, not the exploring the other universes and things like that, but how do they live? They can go to this machine and it could cook them whatever they want to eat. There's no money. Everybody works collectively. Um, Education is open to everyone, and different choices are made. So I think I look. That's kind of like the thing that pops into my mind, is that there is all of the things that we wish for: a place to live, a healthcare, education. All of those basic needs are no longer an issue for us in under communism. There are other issues, perhaps. Maybe I don't know. Like in Star Trek, they go and explore other universes and things like that. It allows them to do that. Why? Because they don't have to be fighting, where their next meal is coming from. But the mind continues to think about things and experiences and ideas and questions that now under communism allows you to really explore those types of things. So that would be my quick answer to that question.
It was a good answer too. I'm a Trekkie too, I'm a Trekkie too, and that's always the example that I give of what a future society um, will look like. We got a long way to go to get there. I like what Marx and Engels, I think, talked about in one of their early writings. They say what we call communism is the movement to abolish the existing state of things, and it's broad sweep, and and that's all to the good. Thank you for listening. Please come back next week, same time, same viewing stations on YouTube, on X, on Facebook. We're trying to get to Instagram and to Twitch. And when we get there, we're going to let you know. Until then, Molly, Rosanna, Scott, stay strong. Comrades all, stay strong, stay safe, stay in the fight. Make sure you get ready, make a plan to vote, and we'll see you next week. Bye, everybody. Take care.